The bell above the door chimed softly as Marcus pushed into Rosie's diner, his 80-year-old daughter Sophie's small hand tucked securely in his. The familiar scent of coffee and fresh pie filled the air, mixing with the gentle hum of conversation from the dinner crowd. It was Thursday night, their night, the one tradition Marcus had managed to keep alive despite everything that had changed in their lives over the past 2 years. Sophie bounced on her toes, her dark curls catching the warm light from the vintage fixtures overhead. She loved coming here, loved the red vinyl booths and the black and white checkered floor that reminded her of a checkerboard. Most of all, she loved having her dad's complete attention for 2 whole hours, no work calls, no worries about bills, just the two of them sharing stories over chocolate chip pancakes and vanilla milkshakes. Marcus scanned the bustling diner, looking for an empty booth. His security guard uniform felt heavy on his shoulders after a long day, but he pushed down the familiar weight of exhaustion. This was Sophie's time, and nothing else mattered. The evening crowd was thick tonight, families and couples filling most of the tables, the warm glow of the diner creating a cocoon of comfort against the darkening sky outside. A young woman with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail approached them, a genuine smile lighting up her features. She wore the standard diner uniform, a simple blue dress with a white apron, but there was something about her posture, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence, that caught Marcus's attention immediately. "Please seat yourselves wherever you're comfortable," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Marcus couldn't quite place. "I'll be right with you to get your order started." Her eyes met Sophie's, and she knelt down slightly to the little girl's level. "And what's your name, sweetheart?" "Sophie," came the shy reply, though her smile was anything but timid. She pressed closer to her father's side, but her curiosity was clearly winning over her natural reserve. "Well, Sophie, I'm Elena, and I think you're going to love what our cook made special tonight." She stood gracefully, and as she gestured toward an empty booth near the window, Marcus noticed something that made him pause. There, on the inside of her left wrist, partially covered by her sleeve but visible when she moved, was a small tattoo. It wasn't decorative or artistic like so many he'd seen. This was different. Professional. Military. The caduceus symbol was unmistakable, intertwined with what looked like airborne wings. Marcus had seen enough military medical insignia during his years as a paramedic to recognize it immediately. This young woman, this waitress taking their order at a small-town diner, had been a military medic. The realization hit him with unexpected force, bringing back memories of his own service days, not in uniform but in ambulances, working alongside veterans who'd transitioned from battlefield medicine to civilian emergency care. Elena led them to the booth, sliding menus across the table with practiced efficiency. "The evening specials are on the board over there," she said, pointing to a chalkboard near the kitchen. "But I have a feeling someone might be interested in our chocolate chip pancakes with extra whipped cream." Sophie's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "How did you know?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "Lucky guess," Elena replied with a wink. "And what about you, sir? What sounds good tonight?" Marcus found himself studying her face, seeing past the friendly waitress exterior to something deeper. There was a steadiness in her eyes, a kind of calm alertness that he recognized from his own years in emergency medicine. She'd seen things, handled pressure, made split-second decisions that meant life or death. He was certain of it. "I'll have the meatloaf special," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that surprised him. "And coffee, black." "Coming right up," Elena said, jotting down their order on her pad. She paused for just a moment, her eyes meeting Marcus's with a flicker of something that might have been recognition, as if she too sensed a shared background, a common understanding that went beyond the typical customer-server relationship. As she walked away, Marcus watched her move through the diner with fluid efficiency, checking on other tables, refilling coffee cups, clearing plates. Every movement was economical, purposeful, the kind of grace that came from training and experience. She handled the controlled chaos of the busy restaurant the way he'd once handled emergency calls, with calm competence and unwavering focus. Sophie pulled out her coloring book and crayons, spreading them across the table with the serious concentration of a child who turned art into a ritual. She always brought the same book, a collection of fairy tale princesses that was now more than half colored, each page a small masterpiece of careful attention and 80-year-old creativity. "Dad," she said without looking up from her current project, an elaborate castle scene, "why do you always look so tired at work?" The question caught Marcus off guard, though he shouldn't have been surprised. Sophie had always been perceptive, picking up on things that adults tried to hide. He reached across the table and gently touched her hand, the same way he'd done when she was smaller and needed reassurance. "Work keeps me busy, sweetheart," he said, which was true enough without being the whole truth. The whole tr. Was that working security at night paid half what he'd made as a paramedic, that the bills kept coming whether he was tired or not, and that he spent most of his days worrying about their future while trying to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. "But you used to help people who were hurt," she continued, her green eyes serious. "Why don't you do that anymore?" Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the weight of explaining adult complications to a child who deserved simple answers. Budget cuts, layoffs, the slow strangulation of public services, none of it made sense to an 80-year-old. None of it made much sense to him either, if he was being honest. "Sometimes jobs change, honey," he said gently. "But I'm still helping people. I keep them safe at night, make sure nothing bad happens while they're sleeping." Sophie nodded solemnly, as if this explanation satisfied her need for order in the world. She returned to her coloring, tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she selected just the right shade of purple for the princess's dress. Elena returned with their drinks, setting down Sophie's chocolate milk and Marcus's coffee with the same careful attention she'd shown before. As she placed the coffee cup in front of him, Marcus noticed her hands. They were steady, capable hands, with small scars along the knuckles that spoke of hard work and harder experiences. When she reached for the sugar dispenser to refill it, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing more of the tattoo and confirming what Marcus had suspected. Those were definitely airborne wings, the kind earned through jump school and specialized training. This woman had been more than just a medic. She'd been an elite medic, the kind who dropped into combat zones and saved lives under fire. The realization made Marcus look at the bustling diner with new eyes, wondering how many other stories were hidden behind the everyday facades of small-town life. "Where in the world are you watching from tonight?" Elena asked suddenly, her voice carrying across the diner to a family at another table. "What time is it where you are?" It was an odd question, the kind that suggested she was thinking about places far from here, about connections that stretched beyond the boundaries of this small restaurant. Marcus found himself wondering about Elena's story, about the path that had led her from military service to waiting tables in a place like this. He'd met enough veterans to know that the transition wasn't always smooth, that skills earned in uniform didn't always translate to civilian opportunities. Maybe she was working her way through school, or supporting family, or simply trying to find her place in a world that didn't always value the sacrifices she'd made. The dinner crowd continued to flow around them, a river of conversation and clinking silverware, but Marcus found his attention repeatedly drawn to Elena as she worked. There was something about her presence that felt familiar, comforting in a way that went beyond professional service. She moved through the diner like she belonged there, but also like she was capable of so much more. Sophie looked up from her coloring, following her father's gaze. "She's nice," she said simply, the kind of uncomplicated observation that children made about the world. "I like her smile." Marcus nodded, realizing his daughter had noticed something he'd been trying to put into words. Elena's smile was genuine, the kind that reached her eyes and suggested a warmth that hadn't been dimmed by whatever experiences had brought her to this place. In a world that often felt cold and disconnected, that kind of authenticity was rare and precious. As the evening settled around them, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a sense of peace that came from being exactly where he was supposed to be. The diner wrapped around them like a warm blanket, the familiar sounds and smells creating a bubble of comfort in an uncertain world. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to relax, to simply enjoy this moment with his daughter, surrounded by the gentle bustle of community and the unexpected comfort of knowing that sometimes, in the most ordinary places, you could find the most extraordinary people. Elena moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, clipping their order to the pass and grabbing the coffee pot for her rounds. The familiar rhythm of the evening shift helped quiet the restless energy that always seemed to simmer just beneath her surface. 3 more hours until closing, then home to her small apartment where medical textbooks waited on the kitchen table, highlighted passages marking her slow but steady progress toward a nursing degree. She'd been at Rosie's for 8 months now, ever since arriving in town with nothing but a duffel bag and a determination to build something new. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, had taken one look at her references and hired her on the spot, no questions asked about why a former Army medic was looking for work in a small-town diner. Some stories were better left untold, at least until trust was earned. The man in booth 7, Marcus, kept drawing her attention. There was something about the way he'd looked at her tattoo, not with casual curiosity but with recognition. She'd caught him watching her work, and his eyes held the same steady assessment she'd seen in other emergency responders. The way he held himself, the careful attention he paid to his surroundings even while relaxing with his daughter, all of it spoke to someone who'd spent time in high-stress situations. His uniform said security guard, but Elena had learned to look beyond surface appearances. The way he'd positioned himself in the booth to keep an eye on both entrances, the unconscious way he'd scanned the room when they'd entered, these were habits born from something more demanding than checking IDs at an office building. She'd bet money he'd been in emergency services, probably EMS or fire department, before whatever circumstances had brought him to his current job. Elena refilled coffee cups at table 3, listening with half an ear to the conversation about the high school football team's chances this season. Small talk was part of the job, but her mind was elsewhere, thinking about the stack of bills waiting at home and the anatomy quiz she needed to study for tomorrow night. Nursing school was harder than she'd expected, not because of the material but because of the time. Working 40 hours a week while carrying a full course load meant every spare moment was precious, every dollar counted twice. The Army had taught her discipline and precision, but it hadn't prepared her for the grinding exhaustion of civilian life, the constant juggling of responsibilities without the clear structure of military hierarchy. In the service, she'd saved lives under fire, performed field surgery in conditions that would terrify most doctors, earned commendations for her skill and courage. Here, she smiled and took orders and pretended that dreams deferred weren't dreams diminished. Back at booth 7, she watched Marcus help his daughter with her coloring, his large hands gentle as he steadied her crayon. There was something achingly familiar about the scene, the careful attention of a single parent who'd learned to be both mother and father. Elena had seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers who carried pictures of children they were fighting to get home to. The kitchen bell chimed, signaling their order was ready. Elena loaded the plates onto her tray, the familiar weight settling into her practiced grip. Chocolate chip pancakes with extra whipped cream for Sophie, meatloaf special for Marcus, both prepared with the kind of care that made Rosie's reputation in the community. Mrs. Patterson insisted on fresh ingredients and home-style cooking, even if it meant smaller profit margins. As she approached their table, Elena noticed Sophie's coloring book was open to a page featuring a princess with a medical bag, tending to injured forest animals. The irony wasn't lost on her that this little girl was coloring healing scenes while her father, who'd probably spent years healing others, now spent his nights walking empty hallways with a flashlight and radio. "Here we go," Elena said, setting down the plates with a flourish that made Sophie giggle. One chocolate chip pancake masterpiece for the artist, and one meatloaf special for the gentleman. She caught Marcus's eye as she set down his plate, noting the way his expression softened when he looked at his daughter. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice carrying genuine appreciation. "It looks perfect." Elena started to turn away, then paused. She'd learned to trust her instincts about people, and something about this quiet man and his bright daughter called to her. "Your little girl has excellent taste in coloring books," she said, gesturing toward the princess page. "I always loved stories about people who helped others." Sophie beamed up at her. "Daddy used to help people too," she said proudly. "He was a hero, but now he just watches buildings at night." The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than a child could understand. Elena saw the quick tightening around Marcus's eyes, the way his jaw clenched slightly before he managed a smile for his daughter. She recognized the look, had seen it in her own mirror often enough. It was the expression of someone who'd lost more than just a job, who'd watched their sense of purpose slip away along with their identity. "That's important work too," Elena said gently, addressing Sophie but speaking to Marcus. "Someone has to keep everyone safe while they sleep. That takes a special kind of person." Marcus looked up at her then, really looked, and Elena saw the moment when he realized she understood. Not just the words, but the weight behind them, the struggle of adapting skills earned in service to a world that didn't always value that service. They shared a look that lasted only seconds but carried the recognition of kindred spirits, people who'd chosen to help others even when it came at personal cost. The moment passed as Elena moved on to check other tables, but something had shifted. The invisible barrier between server and customer had thinned, replaced by the tentative beginning of understanding. Neither of them knew yet how important that connection would become, how soon their shared background would prove to be exactly what fate had in mind. Sophie was halfway through her pancakes when she started rubbing her throat. At first, Marcus thought she was just being dramatic about the syrup being too sticky, the way 80-year-olds sometimes were about textures and flavors. She made a small sound of discomfort and reached for her chocolate milk, taking a long sip before setting the glass down with a frown. "Something wrong with the pancakes, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, though even as he spoke, he noticed something that made his stomach tighten with concern. Sophie's cheeks were flushed, not with excitement but with an unnatural redness that seemed to be spreading down her neck. "They taste funny," Sophie said, her voice slightly hoarse. "And my mouth feels tingly." She touched her lips with one small finger, and Marcus saw what made his blood run cold. Her lips were beginning to swell, just slightly, but enough to be noticeable. Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had once served him well in emergency situations. His mind immediately began cataloging symptoms and possibilities, falling back on training that had been drilled into him through years of paramedic work. Facial swelling, throat irritation, voice changes, all pointing toward one terrifying possibility. "Sophie honey, what exactly does your mouth feel like?" he asked, keeping his voice calm while his heart began to race. "Can you tell Daddy exactly what's happening?" "It's like when I eat those nuts you don't let me have," Sophie replied, and Marcus felt the world shift beneath him. She was allergic to tree nuts, had been since she was 3, but they'd been so careful. He read every label, asked about ingredients everywhere they went, had trained her to ask questions about food. How could this be happening here, at their safe place, their weekly tradition? Sophie's breathing was becoming slightly labored, not dramatic yet but noticeable to someone who knew what to look for. Her face was continuing to redden, and Marcus could see the beginning of hives forming along her neck. Anaphylaxis. The word hit him like a physical blow, bringing with it the knowledge of how quickly things could deteriorate. He stood up quickly, his chair scraping against the floor as panic began to override his training. "Sophie, we need to go right now," he said, reaching for her hand while fumbling for his phone with the other. Where was the nearest hospital? How long would an ambulance take to get here? His mind was racing through possibilities, calculating time and distance while his daughter's condition worsened before his eyes. The noise of his chair and the urgency in his voice had caught the attention of nearby diners, and conversations began to quiet as people turned to look. Marcus barely noticed, his entire focus on Sophie, who was now rubbing her chest and looking increasingly frightened. "Daddy, I don't feel good," she whispered, and Marcus heard the slight wheeze in her voice that confirmed his worst fears. Her airway was beginning to close. They had minutes, maybe less, before this became life-threatening. Marcus picked Sophie up, feeling how warm she was becoming, seeing how the swelling in her face was progressing. His hands were shaking as he tried to dial 911, the simple numbers suddenly seeming impossible to manage. Around them, the comfortable bustle of the diner had changed to worried murmurs and concerned faces, but Marcus felt utterly alone with his terror. That's when Elena appeared beside their table, her face immediately transforming from friendly server to something else entirely. She took one look at Sophie and her expression became professionally calm, the kind of steady focus that Marcus recognized from his own emergency training. Without hesitation, she knelt beside Marcus, her voice quiet but commanding. "How long since she started showing symptoms?" she asked, her hands already moving to feel Sophie's pulse at her wrist, her eyes scanning the child's face and neck with practiced assessment. 2, maybe 3 minutes, Marcus replied, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "She's allergic to tree nuts, but we were so careful. I don't understand how this happened." Elena's mind was already working through protocols, her military medical training taking over as smoothly as if she'd never left the field. She could see the progression of the reaction, could hear the slight stridor beginning in Sophie's breathing that meant they were running out of time. This wasn't a mild allergic reaction anymore. This was full anaphylaxis, and without intervention, this little girl could die. "Sir, I need you to call 911 right now," Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to emergency situations. "Tell them we have a pediatric anaphylactic reaction and we need an ambulance immediately. Then I need you to trust me, because I know what I'm doing." Marcus looked into Elena's eyes and saw something that cut through his panic. Competence. Experience. The kind of steady confidence that came from training and experience in life-or-death situations. He realized in that moment that this young waitress might be the only thing standing between his daughter and disaster. Around them, the diner had fallen silent except for the sound of Marcus's shaking voice giving their location to the 911 dispatcher. Other customers watched with the helpless concern of people witnessing a medical emergency, but Elena moved with purpose, her military training kicking in as naturally as breathing. Sophie's condition was deteriorating rapidly, her breathing becoming more labored, her face continuing to swell. Elena knew they couldn't wait for paramedics. She had to act now, with whatever resources were available, just like she'd done dozens of times in field hospitals and combat zones. The setting was different, but the stakes were exactly the same. A life hung in the balance, and she was the only one with the skills to save it. Elena's mind shifted into combat medic mode, her civilian surroundings fading as training took over. Sophie's breathing was becoming increasingly labored, the characteristic stridor of upper airway obstruction growing more pronounced. She had seen this progression dozens of times in field hospitals, knew exactly how little time they had before complete respiratory failure. She needed epinephrine, and she needed it now. But this was a small-town diner, not a military field hospital or ambulance. Elena's eyes swept the immediate area, cataloging available resources with the efficiency of someone trained to improvise medical solutions under impossible conditions. "I need to get behind the counter," Elena called to Mrs. Patterson, who had appeared from the kitchen with a look of growing alarm. "There might be an EpiPen in the first aid kit, or someone here might have one." She was already moving, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made people step aside without question. "But wait, you can't just," the day manager stammered, a thin man named Derek who had always been more concerned with regulations than common sense. "You're not qualified to handle medical emergencies. We need to wait for real paramedics." Elena spun to face him, her eyes blazing with a combination of professional urgency and barely controlled anger. "I am a former army medic with 3 tours in Afghanistan," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "I have performed emergency procedures under enemy fire that would make your paramedics nervous. Right now, I am the most qualified person in this building to save this child's life, so get out of my way." The authority in her voice, the sudden transformation from friendly waitress to commanding medical officer, left Derek speechless. Other customers began checking their purses and pockets, understanding instinctively that time was critical and everyone needed to help. Marcus watched this exchange while cradling Sophie, whose breathing was becoming more desperate by the moment. The recognition he'd felt earlier about Elena crystallized into profound relief. This woman, this waitress who had served them pancakes and coffee, was exactly who they needed in this moment. He could see the military bearing in her posture now, the confidence of someone who had saved lives under pressure. Mrs. Patterson appeared with the restaurant's first aid kit, her hands shaking as she handed it to Elena. "I don't think there's an EpiPen in there," she said, her voice tight with worry. "We've never needed one before." Elena ripped open the kit, her hands moving with practiced efficiency through bandages and antiseptic. No epinephrine auto-injector, as expected. She looked up to see a middle-aged woman at table 4 digging frantically through her purse. "I have one," the woman called out, her voice rising with excitement and fear. "My grandson is allergic to shellfish. I always carry his spare." She held up the distinctive yellow and black EpiPen, and Elena felt a surge of relief that she kept carefully controlled. "Bring it here immediately," Elena commanded, already positioning Sophie for the injection. "Marcus, I need you to hold her still and keep talking to her. This is going to hurt for just a second, but it's going to make her feel better." Marcus positioned Sophie on the booth seat, his large hands gentle but firm as he held her in place. His own breathing was ragged with fear, but he forced his voice to remain calm for his daughter. "Sophie, sweetheart, this nice lady is going to give you some medicine that's going to help you breathe better, okay? Just like when you had pneumonia last year, remember?" Sophie nodded weakly, her face now significantly swollen, her breathing shallow and rapid. Elena took the EpiPen from the woman's trembling hands, quickly checking the expiration date and dosage. It was current and appropriate for Sophie's weight. She had done this procedure countless times, but never on a child this young, never with a terrified father watching her every move. Elena positioned the auto-injector against Sophie's outer thigh, her movements precise and confident despite the chaos around them. She looked into Marcus's eyes, seeing the trust and desperation there, understanding the weight of the moment. This man was putting his daughter's life in her hands based on nothing more than intuition and the confidence she projected. "On 3, Elena said, her voice steady and reassuring. 1, 2, 3. She pressed the EpiPen firmly against Sophie's leg, holding it in place for the required 10 seconds while the medication delivered. Sophie cried out at the sharp pain of the injection, but Elena could already see the beginning of improvement in her breathing. The epinephrine worked quickly, as it was designed to do. Within moments, Sophie's breathing began to ease, the tight wheeze in her chest loosening as her airways opened. The swelling in her face started to recede, though Elena knew this was just the beginning of what would need to be comprehensive emergency treatment. Around them, the entire diner had fallen silent except for Sophie's gradually improving breathing and the distant sound of approaching sirens. Elena continued to monitor the child's vital signs, checking her pulse and watching her color improve as the medication took effect. She knew they weren't out of danger yet, that Sophie would need additional treatment and monitoring, but the immediate crisis had passed. Derek the manager stood frozen nearby, his earlier objections forgotten in the face of Elena's obvious competence and the successful intervention. Other customers watched in amazed silence, witnessing the transformation of their friendly waitress into a medical professional whose skills had just saved a child's life. Elena looked up at Marcus, seeing the tears of relief starting in his eyes. "She's going to be okay," she said quietly, her hand still monitoring Sophie's pulse. "But she needs to get to the hospital for observation and additional treatment. Sometimes there can be a secondary reaction." Marcus nodded, understanding flooding his features along with overwhelming gratitude. "You saved her life," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "You saved my daughter's life." The sirens grew louder as Elena continued monitoring Sophie's vital signs, her fingers maintaining steady contact with the child's pulse point while her eyes tracked the gradual improvement in breathing and color. The epinephrine had bought them precious time, but Elena's military training had taught her that the first intervention was rarely the last in serious allergic reactions. Sophie's breathing was steadier now, the frightening stridor fading as her airways opened, but Elena could see the exhaustion in the little girl's eyes. Anaphylactic shock took everything out of a person, leaving them drained and vulnerable even after the immediate crisis passed. She kept her voice gentle but alert as she spoke to Sophie, maintaining the kind of reassuring presence she'd perfected in field hospitals. "You're doing great, sweetheart," Elena said, brushing a damp curl away from Sophie's forehead. "The medicine is working really well, and the ambulance is almost here. You're being so brave, just like a real princess. Marcus knelt beside the booth, his hands hovering protectively near his daughter but careful not to interfere with Elena's assessment. The panic in his eyes was giving way to something else, a kind of wonder mixed with profound gratitude as he watched this woman who had materialized like an answer to prayer in their moment of desperate need. Elena glanced up at the gathering crowd of onlookers, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that had once commanded respect in combat zones. "I need everyone to step back and give us some room," she said firmly. "The paramedics will need space to work when they arrive, and this little girl needs calm, not chaos." The crowd immediately complied, people moving away with the kind of automatic obedience that Elena's military bearing inspired. Derek the manager stood at the edge of the group, his earlier protests forgotten as he watched the scene unfold with obvious amazement and perhaps a touch of shame for having questioned Elena's qualifications. Mrs. Patterson appeared with a clean wet cloth, offering it to Elena with shaking hands. "Is there anything else I can do?" she asked, her voice tight with concern and admiration. Elena accepted the cloth gratefully, using it to gently cool Sophie's forehead. "Just keep everyone calm and make sure there's a clear path for the paramedics," she replied. "And thank you for trusting me to handle this." The ambulance arrived with a flash of red and blue lights visible through the diner's front windows, followed immediately by the sound of equipment being unloaded and urgent voices coordinating their approach. Elena felt a familiar surge of relief at the arrival of additional medical support, though she maintained her position monitoring Sophie. Two paramedics entered the diner, their equipment bags in hand and their eyes immediately scanning for their patient. Elena recognized the look of competent professionals assessing a scene, and she prepared to give them a comprehensive handoff that would ensure continuity of care. The lead paramedic, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and confident movements, approached their table. "What do we have here?" she asked, her voice carrying the calm professionalism that Elena remembered from her own emergency medicine days. 80-year-old female, anaphylactic reaction to probable tree nut allergen, Elena reported, shifting smoothly into medical protocol. Onset approximately 15 minutes ago with facial swelling, throat constriction, and respiratory compromise. Administered 0.3 mg epinephrine via autoinjector approximately 8 minutes ago with good response. Current vitals stable, breathing much improved, but she'll need monitoring for potential biphasic reaction. The paramedic looked up sharply at Elena's professional reporting, clearly surprised by the precision and completeness of the information. "You're medical?" she asked, her tone shifting to one of colleague speaking to colleague. "Former Army medic," Elena replied simply. 3 tours in Afghanistan, plenty of experience with emergency interventions under less than ideal conditions. "Well done," the paramedic said, and Elena heard genuine respect in her voice. "That was textbook perfect, and you probably saved this little girl's life. We'll take it from here, but your quick thinking made all the difference." As the paramedics took over Sophie's care, preparing her for transport to the hospital, Elena stepped back to give them room. She watched them work with the critical eye of someone who understood every procedure, every medication, every decision they were making. Sophie was in excellent hands now, but Elena felt the familiar reluctance to let go of a patient she'd stabilized. Marcus stood as the paramedics prepared to move Sophie to their stretcher, his eyes finding Elena's across the controlled chaos of the emergency response. The look that passed between them carried more than gratitude. It held recognition, respect, and the beginning of something that might become lasting connection. Around them, the other diner customers watched in amazed silence as the drama unfolded. Many had witnessed Elena's transformation from friendly waitress to commanding medical professional, and the whispered conversations that began to ripple through the crowd carried notes of awe and newfound respect. "What part of this story resonates most with you?" Elena found herself thinking as she watched the paramedics work. Share your thoughts about how quickly life can change, how hidden strengths emerge in crisis, and how the most ordinary moments can become extraordinary when someone steps forward to help. The thought surprised her, this sudden awareness of being watched, of being part of something larger than just another emergency call. But there was something about this moment, this intersection of her past training and present circumstances, that felt significant in ways she couldn't yet fully understand. As Sophie was carefully transferred to the ambulance stretcher, Elena realized that her quiet life as a nursing student working in a small-town diner had just changed forever. The skills she'd carried in silence, the training she'd set aside for civilian life, had suddenly become visible to everyone who mattered. There would be no going back to invisibility after this. As the paramedics prepared to transport Sophie to the hospital, Marcus found himself torn between following his daughter and properly thanking the woman who had saved her life. Elena seemed to sense his dilemma, stepping closer to him with the same calm authority she'd displayed throughout the crisis. "You need to go with her," Elena said quietly, her hand briefly touching his arm. "She's stable now, but she'll want her dad with her at the hospital. I'll ride along if the paramedics don't mind the extra help." The lead paramedic overheard and nodded immediately. "We'd welcome the assist, especially given your background. It's always good to have experienced medical personnel along on pediatric cases." Marcus felt a wave of relief that surprised him with its intensity. Not only would Sophie have continued medical support during transport, but Elena would be there, this remarkable woman who had already proven she could handle whatever emergency might arise. More than that, he found himself not wanting to lose contact with Elena, not wanting this crisis to end with a simple goodbye and a return to their separate lives. As they moved toward the ambulance, Elena walking alongside Sophie's stretcher while monitoring her condition, Marcus realized he was seeing someone he hadn't known existed. The friendly waitress had been completely authentic, but she was only one facet of a much more complex person. This Elena, the one giving medical instructions and coordinating with paramedics, revealed depths that took his breath away. Inside the ambulance, Elena positioned herself where she could assist without interfering with the paramedics' protocols. Sophie, now more alert as the epinephrine continued to work, reached for her father's hand while looking curiously at Elena, who had somehow transformed from their server into her medical guardian. "You're really good at helping people," Sophie said, her voice still slightly hoarse but much stronger than it had been. "Are you a doctor like the ones who helped me when I had pneumonia?" Elena smiled, settling into the jump seat across from Sophie's stretcher. "I used to be a medic in the army, sweetheart. I helped soldiers who got hurt, kind of like doctors do but in different places. Now I'm learning to be a nurse so I can help people in hospitals." Marcus found himself studying Elena's face as she spoke to Sophie, seeing the gentleness there alongside the professional competence. How did someone go from saving lives in combat zones to serving pancakes in a small-town diner? What circumstances had led her to set aside her obvious talents for such humble work? The ambulance ride gave him time to process what had just happened, and more importantly, what it revealed about both of them. Elena had recognized his background just as he'd recognized hers, some instinctive understanding that came from shared experience in emergency services. They were both people who had dedicated their lives to helping others, both now working in jobs that didn't fully utilize their training and experience. Sophie's condition remained stable during the short ride to the regional medical center, but Elena never stopped monitoring her, checking pulse and respiration with the unconscious regularity of someone for whom patient assessment had become second nature. Marcus watched her work and found himself thinking about the conversation they'd barely started in the diner, the recognition that had passed between them. Elena caught him watching her and offered a small smile that held understanding. "You were EMS," she said quietly, not quite a question but an invitation for confirmation. "Paramedic for 12 years, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the weight of everything that simple statement encompassed. "Laid off 2 years ago when the county cut emergency services funding. Been working security ever since, trying to keep things together for Sophie." Elena nodded, her expression showing she understood exactly what that transition meant. The loss wasn't just financial, it was identity, purpose, the thing that made you who you were. She'd felt the same disorientation when she'd left the military, the strange emptiness of civilian life after years of mission-critical work. "I get it," she said simply. "Some days I serve coffee and wonder what happened to the person who used to perform field surgery under mortar fire. It's like being split in two, the person you were and the person you have to be now." The honesty in her voice, the recognition of their shared experience, created an intimacy that surprised Marcus. Here in the back of an ambulance, surrounded by medical equipment and the controlled chaos of emergency transport, he felt more understood than he had in months. Sophie drifted into a light doze as the medication and exhaustion caught up with her, her breathing now completely normal, her color good. Elena continued her vigilant monitoring, but she also found herself studying Marcus, seeing in his careful attention to his daughter the same protective instincts she'd witnessed in combat medics caring for wounded soldiers. At the hospital, they were met by an emergency department team that took immediate charge of Sophie's care. Elena provided another comprehensive handoff to the receiving physician, her military precision and medical vocabulary leaving no doubt about her qualifications. The doctor, a woman about Elena's age, listened with obvious respect before ordering the standard protocol for anaphylactic reaction follow-up. As Sophie was settled into an observation room, Elena found herself reluctant to leave. Hospital protocol didn't require her presence anymore, and her shift at the diner was probably a disaster by now, but something kept her anchored to this moment, this family, this unexpected intersection of her past skills and present circumstances. Marcus seemed to sense her hesitation. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my daughter's life tonight. I'm not sure what would have happened if you hadn't been there." Elena looked at Sophie, now resting comfortably with normal breathing and rapidly improving color, then back at Marcus. "This is what I trained for," she said quietly. "This is what I'm supposed to be doing. Tonight reminded me of who I really am." The emergency department hummed with controlled activity around them, but Elena found herself caught in a moment of unexpected clarity. Watching Sophie sleep peacefully under the careful monitoring of hospital equipment, seeing Marcus's profound relief as his daughter's condition stabilized completely, Elena realized something fundamental had shifted inside her during the past hour. For months, she'd been going through the motions of civilian life, working at the diner while pursuing her nursing degree, telling herself that her military medical training was just background now, something to be grateful for but not something that defined her current path. Tonight had shattered that careful compartmentalization, revealing that her skills weren't dormant history but living capabilities that could still save lives. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Chen, approached their small group with Sophie's chart in hand and a smile that indicated good news. "She's responding beautifully to treatment," Dr. Chen said, her voice carrying professional warmth. "All her vitals are stable, the swelling has completely resolved, and her respiratory function is back to baseline. We'll keep her for observation for another few hours to watch for any delayed reaction, but I expect she'll be going home tonight." Marcus felt his shoulders sag with relief he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The past 2 hours had been a journey through his worst fears as a parent, the terrifying helplessness of watching his child in medical crisis. Now, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of a hospital where competent people work to heal rather than simply watch over empty buildings, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt useful again. Dr. Chen turned to Elena with obvious respect. "The paramedics told me about your intervention," she said. "That was exceptional emergency medicine, especially working with limited resources. Your military training shows, and frankly, your quick thinking probably prevented a much more serious outcome." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, surprised by how much the professional recognition meant to her. It had been so long since someone had acknowledged her medical capabilities, since she'd been seen as anything more than a friendly face taking dinner orders. "Thank you," she replied quietly. It felt good to use those skills again. Dr. Chen studied Elena with the assessing look of someone making a professional evaluation. "Are you currently working in healthcare?" she asked, her tone suggesting more than casual interest. "I'm finishing my nursing degree," Elena said, then hesitated before adding, "but I'm working at Rosie's diner to pay for school. It's not exactly using my background, but it pays the bills." "What year are you in the nursing program?" Dr. Chen asked, her interest clearly piqued. "Second year," Elena replied. "I should graduate next spring if everything goes according to plan." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully, then glanced at Marcus before returning her attention to Elena. "We're always looking for experienced medical personnel. especially people with your kind of emergency background. Have you considered working in healthcare while you finish school? There are positions that would value your military experience and give you relevant clinical exposure. Elena felt her heart skip slightly. The idea of returning to medical work, even in a support capacity, awakened something in her that had been sleeping for too long. But practical concerns immediately crowded in. The diner job was reliable, if not exciting, and she couldn't afford to take risks with her income while finishing school. Marcus found himself watching this conversation with growing understanding in something that surprised him, a kind of protective concern for Elena that went beyond gratitude for what she'd done tonight. He recognized the look in her eyes, the mixture of hope and caution that came from wanting something you weren't sure you could afford to risk. "What kind of positions?" Elena asked, her voice carefully neutral despite the obvious interest in her expression. Dr. Chen smiled, clearly recognizing talent when she saw it. Emergency department technician, surgical assistant, even trauma team support. With your military medical background, you'd be qualified for several roles that pay significantly better than food service and would give you hands-on experience that would enhance your nursing education. The conversation was interrupted by Sophie stirring awake, her eyes immediately finding her father's face with the instinctive need for reassurance that children have after frightening experiences. Marcus moved to her bedside, taking her small hand in his larger one while Elena automatically checked her pulse and breathing, the gestures so natural they seemed unconscious. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Marcus asked gently, brushing hair back from Sophie's forehead. "Better," Sophie replied, her voice much stronger now. "My throat doesn't hurt anymore, and I can breathe really good." She looked at Elena with curiosity mixed with gratitude. "Are you going to be my nurse now?" Elena smiled, feeling something warm and protective stir in her chest. "I'm not officially a nurse yet, but I'll always be someone who cares about you and your dad," she said. "Tonight showed me that some things about who you are never really change, even when life takes you in different directions." Marcus caught Elena's eye over Sophie's head, and the look that passed between them carried layers of meaning that neither was quite ready to name. Tonight had revealed hidden depths in both of them, capabilities and connections that went far beyond their surface circumstances. As the evening progressed and Sophie's recovery continued without complications, Elena found herself reluctant to return to her regular life. The diner would be closing soon, and she'd missed most of her shift, but somehow those practical concerns seemed less important than they had that morning. Tonight had reminded her of who she really was beneath the carefully constructed identity of small-town waitress and nursing student. Dr. Chen returned with discharge papers and a business card that she handed to Elena. "Think about what we discussed," she said quietly. "Healthcare needs people like you, people who can think quickly and act decisively when lives are on the line. Your military training combined with your nursing education would make you invaluable to any medical team." Elena accepted the card with hands that trembled slightly, not from nervousness but from the sudden recognition that her life might be about to change in ways she hadn't dared to imagine. Tonight had started as just another shift serving dinner, but it was ending with possibilities she'd thought were closed to her forever. As the hospital prepared Sophie for discharge, Elena found herself walking with Marcus toward the family waiting area, their conversation flowing with the easy familiarity of people who had shared an intense experience. The sterile hospital corridors felt comfortable to both of them in ways that surprised neither, the familiar environment of medical urgency and healing that had once defined their professional lives. Sophie walked between them, her small hand alternating between her father's grasp and Elena's, chattering about how much better she felt and asking questions about hospitals and ambulances with the boundless curiosity of a child who had just survived her first real medical emergency. Her resilience amazed Elena, the way children could bounce back from trauma that would leave adults shaken for weeks. In the quiet corner of the waiting area, with Sophie settled in a chair looking at a picture book the nurses had given her, Marcus and Elena found themselves truly talking for the first time. The crisis had stripped away the careful politeness of server and customer, leaving behind two people who recognized something fundamental in each other. 12 years as a paramedic, Marcus said, continuing the conversation they'd started in the ambulance. "I loved everything about it, the adrenaline, the problem-solving, knowing that what I did mattered. Then the county decided emergency services were too expensive, and suddenly I was just another unemployed single dad with bills to pay. Elena nodded, understanding the bitter irony of being too qualified for available jobs while being underqualified for the work you trained your entire adult life to do. The military taught me that mission comes first, that you do whatever it takes to save lives and complete the objective, she said quietly. Civilian life doesn't work that way. Everything is about profit margins and efficiency reports and bureaucratic procedures that have nothing to do with helping people. Marcus found himself studying Elena's profile as she spoke, seeing past the surface to the person beneath. There was strength there, but also a kind of weariness that he recognized from his own mirror. They were both people who had been shaped by service, who had built their identities around helping others, only to find themselves sidelined by economic realities and institutional indifference. "What made you choose nursing school?" he asked, genuinely curious about her path forward. Elena was quiet for a moment, her eyes on Sophie, who was now coloring in the margins of her picture book with a crayon the nurses had provided. "I needed something that felt like coming home," she said finally. "The military gave me purpose, a sense that what I did mattered. When I got out, everything felt hollow. Nursing seemed like a way to get back to that feeling of being useful, of making a difference." Marcus understood completely. After losing his paramedic position, he'd applied for fire department jobs, EMT positions, anything that would let him use his training. But budget cuts were everywhere, and openings were scarce. Security work paid the bills and let him be home for Sophie during the day, but it felt like wearing a suit that didn't fit, playing a role that had nothing to do with who he really was. Sophie looked up from her coloring, fixing Elena with the serious expression she got when asking important questions. "Are you going to be friends with me and Daddy now?" she asked with the directness that only children possessed. Elena felt something warm and unexpected move through her chest. "I'd like that very much," she said honestly. "Tonight reminded me that some of the best things in life happen when you least expect them." Marcus felt the truth of those words resonate through him. This morning, Elena had been a stranger, a friendly face serving coffee and pancakes. Now, she felt like someone who had always been meant to be part of their lives, someone who understood not just what had happened tonight but what it meant for all of them. The conversation turned to practical matters, phone numbers exchanged, plans made for checking on Sophie's recovery over the next few days. But underneath the ordinary details of new friendship, both adults recognized that something more significant was taking shape. Tonight had revealed hidden depths in both of them, capabilities and connections that went beyond circumstance. Elena told them about her small apartment near the college, about her class schedule and her shifts at the diner. Marcus shared details about his security rounds, his careful budgeting, his determination to give Sophie every opportunity he could manage. They were both people rebuilding their lives from setbacks, but tonight had shown them that rebuilding didn't have to mean settling for less than they were capable of becoming. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Dr. Chen appeared one final time, her attention focused on Elena. "I meant what I said about opportunities here," she said quietly. "We have an opening for an emergency department technician position that would be perfect for someone with your background. The pay is better than food service, the hours would work with your class schedule, and the experience would be invaluable for your nursing career." Elena felt her heart race with possibility and fear in equal measure. After tonight, the idea of returning to medical work felt like coming back to life, but the practical side of her worried about making changes that could disrupt the careful stability she'd built. Marcus found himself hoping Elena would take the position, not just because it would mean seeing her again but because he'd witnessed her capabilities tonight and knew she belonged in healthcare. The diner was lucky to have her, but she was meant for something more challenging and meaningful. "Think about it," Dr. Chen continued, handing Elena another business card. "Call me tomorrow if you're interested. We could arrange for you to shadow a shift, see if it feels like the right fit." As they walked toward the hospital exit, Sophie between them chattering about her adventure and Elena quiet with the weight of unexpected possibilities, Marcus realized that tonight had changed more than just their immediate circumstances. It had reminded both him and Elena of who they really were beneath the roles they'd been forced to play, and shown them that sometimes the most ordinary moments could become doorways to extraordinary changes. The drive home from the hospital passed in comfortable silence, Sophie dozing in her car seat while Marcus navigated the familiar streets of their small town. Elena had offered to follow them home to make sure Sophie was settled, and her headlights in his rearview mirror provided an unexpected comfort that Marcus hadn't realized he'd been missing. At home, Elena helped carry Sophie inside, her presence in their small apartment feeling natural despite the fact that she'd never been there before. Sophie woke enough to brush her teeth and change into pajamas, accepting Elena's help with the easy trust that children showed to people who had proven themselves worthy of confidence. As Marcus tucked Sophie into bed, Elena found herself studying the modest apartment with eyes that saw beyond the surface. The furniture was simple but well-maintained, the walls decorated with Sophie's artwork and school photos. Everything spoke of careful management of limited resources, of a father doing his absolute best to create a stable, loving home for his daughter. Elena noticed the stack of medical textbooks on the kitchen counter, outdated editions that Marcus had probably kept from his paramedic training. Beside them lay a notebook filled with what looked like practice scenarios, evidence that he still studied emergency protocols even though his current job required nothing more than checking doors and watching security monitors. When Marcus emerged from Sophie's room, he found Elena examining one of his old emergency medicine reference books. The irony of their situation struck him again. Here they were, two people with extensive medical training, him reading outdated textbooks to stay sharp while working security, her serving pancakes while pursuing a nursing degree that would formalize skills she already possessed in abundance. "She's asleep," Marcus said quietly, settling into the chair across from where Elena sat on his small couch. "I can't thank you enough for everything tonight. Not just saving Sophie, but being there through all of it. I felt like I had a partner again, someone who understood what was happening and knew what to do." Elena set down the textbook, her expression thoughtful. "It felt good to be useful again," she said honestly. "For months I've been going through the motions of normal life, but tonight reminded me why I loved emergency medicine in the first place. There's something about being needed in a crisis that nothing else can replace." They talked quietly about their careers, their losses, their hopes for the future. Elena shared stories from her military service, the satisfaction of performing field surgery under impossible conditions, the bonds formed with fellow medics who understood that their work was literally life and death. Marcus told her about his favorite calls as a paramedic, the saves that made all the difficult shifts worthwhile, the feeling of making a real difference in people's worst moments. As the evening wore on, Elena found herself reluctant to leave this warm apartment where she felt more understood than she had in months. Marcus seemed equally reluctant to end the conversation, recognizing in Elena someone who shared not just his professional background but his values, his commitment to helping others even when it came at personal cost. The conversation was interrupted by Elena's phone ringing. She glanced at the screen and sighed. "It's Mrs. Patterson from the diner," she said apologetically. "I probably should have called earlier to explain why I disappeared during my shift." Elena answered the call, expecting criticism or concerns about her sudden departure. Instead, Mrs. Patterson's voice carried excitement and pride. "Elena, dear, I've been hearing about what happened tonight from customers who were there. Word is spreading all over town about how you saved that little girl's life. People are talking about what a hero you are." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks as Marcus watched her side of the conversation with obvious curiosity. "I just did what anyone with medical training would have done," she replied, uncomfortable with the attention. Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice warm with genuine affection. "Don't you dare minimize what you did tonight. You showed everyone in that diner what you're really made of, and I couldn't be prouder to have you working here. But more than that, someone else wants to talk to you about tonight." Elena heard the phone being passed to someone else, and then a man's voice came on the line, older and carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Miss Elena, this is Robert Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's husband and the owner of Rosie's Diner. I was at my office when I heard about what happened tonight, and I had to come down to see for myself." Elena found herself standing straighter despite being on the phone, something in Robert Patterson's tone commanding respect. "Sir," she said simply, waiting to hear whether she still had a job after abandoning her shift. "What I heard about your actions tonight reminded me why I went into the restaurant business in the first place," Patterson continued. "It's about serving the community, being there when people need you most. What you did tonight embodied everything I believe about the purpose of business in a small town." Elena felt Marcus watching her intently, clearly trying to follow the conversation from her responses. She gave him a small smile that mixed nervousness with curiosity about where this conversation was heading. "I've been thinking for some time about expanding our operations," Patterson continued. "Adding a catering component that could serve community events, provide meals for emergency responders, maybe even partner with the hospital for staff services. What I need is someone to head up that division, someone with the medical background to understand the needs of healthcare workers and the organizational skills to make it work." Elena felt her breath catch. "Mr. Patterson, I'm not sure I understand what you're offering," she said carefully. "I'm offering you a management position with a significant increase in pay, flexible scheduling that would work with your nursing school commitments, and the opportunity to build something meaningful while you finish your education. You've proven tonight that you're exactly the kind of person I want representing my business in the community." Elena looked at Marcus, seeing understanding and encouragement in his eyes. 2 job offers in one night, both recognizing skills she'd thought were invisible in her current circumstances. The universe seemed to be conspiring to pull her back toward the medical world she'd thought she'd left behind. Elena ended the call with Mr. Patterson, her mind reeling from the unexpected offer. In the span of a few hours, she'd gone from invisible waitress to local hero to having 2 different opportunities that would dramatically change her life's trajectory. She looked at Marcus, who was watching her with obvious curiosity and what appeared to be genuine excitement for her good fortune. "That sounded like good news," Marcus said, settling back in his chair with a smile that reached his eyes. "Tell me what happened." Elena recounted the conversation with Mr. Patterson, describing the catering management position and the recognition it represented. As she spoke, she found herself processing the implications out loud, the way the position would utilize her organizational skills while acknowledging her medical background, the flexibility it would provide for finishing nursing school, the opportunity to serve the community in a more meaningful way. Marcus listened with growing amazement, seeing in Elena's excitement a reflection of his own hunger for work that mattered. 2 offers in one night, he said, shaking his head in wonder. "It's like the universe decided to pay attention to what you're really capable of." Elena felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with her excitement. Both opportunities represented significant changes, stepping away from the safe anonymity of her current life into positions where her capabilities would be visible and her performance would matter. After months of deliberately keeping a low profile, the prospect of being seen and valued for her skills felt both thrilling and terrifying. They talked through the practical considerations of each opportunity, Marcus offering the perspective of someone who understood both the healthcare field and the challenges of balancing work with education. His insights were valuable, but more than that, Elena found herself grateful to have someone who understood the weight of the decision she was facing. The conversation was interrupted by a soft call from Sophie's room. "Daddy, I can't sleep. Can Elena read me a story?" Marcus looked at Elena apologetically, but she was already standing, clearly pleased by the request. "I'd love to," she called back to Sophie. "What's your favorite story?" Elena followed Marcus into Sophie's small bedroom, which was decorated with princess posters and stuffed animals arranged with the careful precision that 80-year-olds brought to their most treasured possessions. Sophie was sitting up in bed, her hair mussed from sleep and her eyes bright with the alertness that sometimes followed medical emergencies. Sophie handed Elena a well-worn copy of a fairy tale collection, the pages soft from countless readings. "This one," she said, pointing to a story about a princess who disguised herself as a peasant to help her people. "Daddy says it's about how being brave means helping others even when it's hard." Elena settled into the chair beside Sophie's bed, Marcus leaning against the doorframe as she began to read. Her voice was gentle but clear, bringing the story to life with the same careful attention she'd shown during the medical emergency. As she read about the princess who chose service over comfort, who used her hidden skills to heal and protect those who needed her most, Elena couldn't help but see parallels to her own situation. Sophie's eyes grew heavy as the story progressed, but she fought sleep, clearly wanting to extend this moment with Elena. When the story ended, Sophie reached for Elena's hand, her small fingers wrapping around Elena's with surprising strength. "Are you going to take the new job?" Sophie asked with the directness that children brought to important questions. Elena glanced at Marcus, then back at Sophie. "I think I might, sweetheart. Sometimes opportunities come along that remind you of who you're supposed to be." Sophie nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her 80-year-old understanding of the world. "Good," she said simply. "You're supposed to help people. I could tell from the first time I met you." As Sophie finally drifted off to sleep, Elena found herself deeply moved by the child's simple faith in her capabilities. Children saw things that adults often missed, recognized authenticity and competence without the complications of politics and economics that clouded grown-up judgment. Elena and Marcus returned to the living room, both of them affected by Sophie's innocent wisdom. Elena found herself thinking about the story she'd just read, about the princess who had chosen to use her gifts in service of others rather than hiding behind a comfortable facade. If this touched your heart, Elena thought, reflecting on the evening's events, let us know where you're listening from and share this story with others who might need to remember that sometimes the most ordinary moments can become extraordinary when someone steps forward to help. Marcus made coffee, and they continued talking late into the night, sharing stories about their backgrounds, their fears, their hopes for the future. Elena told him about her deployment experiences, the satisfaction of saving lives under impossible conditions, the difficulty of transitioning to civilian life where her skills felt irrelevant. Marcus shared his struggles with single parenthood, the weight of responsibility for Sophie's future, the frustration of working beneath his capabilities while more qualified positions remained out of reach. As the evening wound down, Elena realized that accepting either of the offers she'd received would mean more than just a career change. It would mean stepping back into visibility, acknowledging her capabilities publicly, accepting the responsibility that came with using her gifts fully. After months of hiding in plain sight, the prospect felt both liberating and daunting. Marcus walked her to the door, both of them reluctant to end the evening that had changed so much for both of them. Elena paused on the threshold, looking back at him with an expression that mixed gratitude, hope, and something deeper that neither was quite ready to name. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not just for tonight, but for seeing me. Really seeing me. It's been a long time since anyone looked past the surface to who I actually am." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with recognition. Tonight he'd met someone who understood not just his professional background but his values, his commitment to service, his determination to build something meaningful despite the obstacles. In Elena, he'd found not just someone who had saved his daughter's life, but someone who might help him remember who he was supposed to be. The next morning brought clarity that Elena hadn't expected. She woke in her small apartment with the business cards from Dr. Chen and the memory of Mr. Patterson's offer weighing on her mind, but for the first time in months, the weight felt hopeful rather than burdensome. The events of the previous evening had reminded her of something she'd forgotten during her careful transition to civilian life: she was meant to be more than invisible. Elena called Dr. Chen first, accepting the offer to shadow a shift in the emergency department. The conversation was brief but warm, Dr. Chen clearly pleased that Elena was interested in returning to medical work. They arranged for Elena to observe the following weekend, giving her a chance to see if hospital work felt like coming home or just another job. The call to Mr. Patterson was more complex, involving detailed discussions about the catering division's scope, the management responsibilities, and the timeline for implementation. Elena found herself energized by the planning conversation, her mind automatically organizing logistics and identifying potential challenges in ways that surprised her with their sophistication. By afternoon, Elena had made her decision. She would accept Mr. Patterson's offer to manage the catering division while also taking the part-time emergency department position. The combination would provide financial stability, relevant experience for her nursing career, and most importantly, the chance to use her skills in service of others rather than simply getting by. Elena's first stop was the diner, where she found Mrs. Patterson and several staff members eager to hear about her plans. Word of the previous night's drama had spread through the small town with the speed that dramatic stories always traveled in close-knit communities, and Elena found herself receiving congratulations and admiration that made her uncomfortable but also strangely proud. Mr. Patterson arrived shortly after Elena, his presence commanding the kind of respect that came from decades of successful business leadership and community involvement. He was a man in his 60s with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to making decisions that mattered. "Elena," Mr. Patterson said, extending his hand with genuine warmth, "I'm delighted that you're interested in the management position. After hearing about last night, I'm even more convinced that you're exactly what we need to take our community service to the next level." They spent an hour discussing the details of the catering operation, Elena's responsibilities, and the vision for serving local healthcare facilities, emergency responders, and community events. Elena found herself contributing ideas and suggestions that clearly impressed Mr. Patterson, her military organizational experience translating perfectly to business planning. As they talked, Elena realized that Mr. Patterson's offer represented more than just a job opportunity. It was recognition of her leadership capabilities, acknowledgement that her background qualified her for responsibility and decision-making authority. After months of taking orders and serving others, the prospect of being trusted with significant responsibility felt like awakening from a long sleep. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to the diner. Marcus appeared during Elena's planning session with Mr. Patterson, Sophie in tow and both of them looking much better than they had the previous evening. Sophie's color was completely normal, her energy restored, and her smile bright as she spotted Elena across the restaurant. "Elena," Sophie called out, running over with the enthusiasm that only children could maintain. "Daddy brought me to see if you were here. I wanted to tell you that I feel all better now." Elena knelt down to Sophie's level, her heart warming at the sight of the little girl's complete recovery. "You look wonderful, sweetheart. How are you feeling about last night? Sometimes big scary things can seem even scarier the next day." Sophie considered this seriously, the way children did when adults asked them to think about their feelings. "It was scary," she said honestly, "but I wasn't really scared because you knew what to do. Daddy says you're going to have a new job where you can help lots of people." Elena glanced up at Marcus, who was watching the interaction with obvious affection for both of them. "Word travels fast in a small town," he said with a smile. "I heard through the grapevine that you had some interesting conversations today." Mr. Patterson approached their small group, clearly recognizing Marcus from the previous evening's events. "You must be Sophie's father," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Robert Patterson, and I owe you a debt of gratitude for bringing such an exceptional person into our community. Elena's going to be heading up our new catering division." Marcus shook Patterson's hand, his expression mixing pride for Elena with something deeper that he wasn't quite ready to examine. "She's remarkable," Marcus said simply. "Last night showed everyone what I suspected from the first time I met her. She's meant for bigger things than taking dinner orders." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks at Marcus's words, but also a warmth that went beyond embarrassment. Having someone believe in her capabilities, someone whose judgment she respected, meant more than she'd expected. For so long, she'd been managing her own expectations, carefully limiting her ambitions to what seemed safely achievable. Marcus's confidence in her abilities reminded her that other people sometimes saw possibilities that she'd trained herself not to consider. Sophie tugged on Elena's sleeve, clearly having something important to say. "Are you still going to be our friend even though you have a fancy new job?" she asked with the seriousness that children brought to questions about relationships and loyalty. Elena felt something move in her chest, a recognition that this little girl and her father had become important to her in ways that went beyond gratitude for their role in her professional transformation. "Always," she said firmly. "Some friendships are too special to change just because other things in life change." Mr. Patterson watched this exchange with obvious approval, recognizing in Elena's interaction with Sophie the kind of genuine care and attention that would serve her well in a management position focused on community service. The catering division would require someone who understood that food service was ultimately about caring for people, meeting their needs during important moments in their lives. As the afternoon wore on, Elena found herself surrounded by people who saw her potential, who valued her capabilities, who expected her to succeed. The contrast with her months of careful invisibility was striking, but it felt right in ways that surprised her. She'd spent so long protecting herself from disappointment that she'd forgotten the satisfaction of being challenged, of having people depend on her skills and judgment. The evening ended with Elena accepting both positions, scheduling her first shadow shift at the hospital, and beginning to plan the launch of Patterson's catering division. As she prepared to leave the diner, Elena realized that 24 hours earlier, she'd been serving pancakes and coffee with no expectation that her life was about to change dramatically. Now she was stepping into leadership roles that would utilize her full range of capabilities while positioning her for the nursing career she'd been slowly working toward. 3 months later, Elena stood in the bustling emergency department of Regional Medical Center, her scrubs bearing the patch that identified her as an emergency medical technician. The transformation from diner waitress to healthcare professional felt as natural as breathing, her military training and emergency experience making her an invaluable member of the trauma team. Dr. Chen had been right about the fit being perfect. The catering division at Patterson's had launched successfully, providing meals for hospital staff, emergency responders, and community events with the kind of attention to detail and understanding of customer needs that only someone with Elena's background could provide. The combination of both positions had given Elena financial stability while allowing her to use her skills fully, and her nursing program was progressing ahead of schedule thanks to the practical experience she was gaining. More importantly, Elena felt like herself again. The quiet confidence that had carried her through military service had returned, strengthened by the recognition and respect she'd earned in both her positions. People looked to her for leadership now, trusted her judgment, valued her contributions in ways that reminded her daily of her own worth. Marcus had experienced his own transformation, though his had taken a different path. Elena's success and the connections she'd made in the medical community had led to conversations about his background, recommendations that reached the right ears, and eventually an offer to return to emergency medical services as a supervisor for the county's expanded paramedic program. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that Elena's visible success had helped Marcus find his way back to meaningful work. But more than professional advancement, their friendship had deepened into something that enriched both their lives in ways neither had expected when they'd first met over chocolate chip pancakes and coffee. Sophie thrived in the stability that came from having 2 adults in her life who were fulfilled by their work and confident in their abilities. She split her time between Elena's apartment, where she helped plan catering menus and learned about basic first aid, and accompanying Marcus on appropriate ride-alongs that fed her growing interest in emergency medicine. On this particular evening, Elena finished her shift at the hospital and drove to the diner where Marcus and Sophie were waiting for their weekly dinner tradition. The booth where Sophie had nearly died was now their regular table, transformed from a place of crisis into a symbol of resilience and new beginnings. Elena slid into the booth across from them, still wearing her hospital ID badge and carrying the satisfied exhaustion that came from a day spent using her skills to help others. Sophie immediately launched into a detailed account of her school day, her teacher's praise for a science project about emergency medicine, and her excitement about the weekend plans they'd made. "How was your shift?" Marcus asked, his eyes warm with the affection that had grown between them over the months since that dramatic first night. "Busy but good," Elena replied, accepting the coffee that their current server brought without being asked. 3 trauma cases, all successful outcomes, and Dr. Chen asked me to consider the nursing supervisor track when I graduate. Apparently my organizational skills are as valuable as my clinical experience. Marcus felt familiar pride in Elena's success, mixed with gratitude for the way her achievements had opened doors for his own career advancement. Their relationship had evolved into something that transcended the traditional boundaries of friendship or romance, becoming instead a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and the recognition that they were both better together than apart. Sophie looked up from her coloring, fixing both adults with the serious expression she wore when making important observations. "You know what I think," she announced with 80-year-old authority. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Elena asked, genuinely curious about Sophie's perspective on their unusual family dynamic. "I think you and Daddy were supposed to meet that night," Sophie said matter-of-factly. I think my allergy happened so you could save me and then you could save each other too. Elena and Marcus exchanged a look over Sophie's head, both of them struck by the simple wisdom of the observation. There was truth in what Sophie had said, though not in the way a child might understand it. They had saved each other, not from physical danger but from the slow suffocation of lives lived beneath their capabilities, from the isolation of being invisible in plain sight. Elena reached across the table to touch Sophie's hand, then extended her fingers to include Marcus in the gesture. You might be right about that, she said quietly. Sometimes the most important things happen when we least expect them, and the people we're meant to find show up exactly when we need them most. As they shared their meal and continued their conversation, Elena found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she had been serving pancakes and working toward a nursing degree with no expectation that her military experience would ever be valued again. Marcus had been walking empty hallways with a flashlight, his medical training gathering dust while he struggled to provide for his daughter. Now Elena was building a career that utilized all her capabilities while contributing meaningfully to her community. Marcus was back in emergency services, using his experience to train the next generation of paramedics while ensuring that budget cuts never again left communities without adequate emergency coverage. Sophie was thriving in an environment where both the adults in her life were fulfilled and confident. The evening ended as their weekly dinners always did, with Sophie falling asleep between them during the drive home, Elena and Marcus carrying on quiet conversations about their work, their hopes, their gratitude for the unexpected paths that had brought them together. They were family now, not in the traditional sense but in the deeper way that came from choosing to care for each other, to support each other's growth, to build something meaningful together. As Elena tucked Sophie into bed, the little girl whispered something that captured the essence of their transformation. Elena, she said sleepily, I'm glad you noticed my daddy needed a friend, and I'm glad he noticed you were special right from the beginning. Elena kissed Sophie's forehead, her heart full with the recognition that sometimes the most beautiful things in life grew from the most unexpected moments. If this touched your heart, she thought, remembering how far they'd all come, remember that everyone around you has hidden depths, hidden capabilities, hidden stories waiting to be seen and valued. Outside Sophie's room, Marcus was waiting with 2 cups of tea, his expression carrying the peaceful satisfaction of a man who had found his way back to himself and discovered that the journey was even better when shared with others who understood the destination.